Developing right now on Morning News Now, a stormy start to the first day of spring. This morning, millions of people waking up to several inches of snow as a severe weather system makes its way to the northeast. Out west, powerful winds and dry conditions putting firefighters on alert, and the threat is far from over. We have a team tracking it all. Also this morning, federal fight. President Trump taking aim at the Department of Education with plans to dismantle the agency that's already been cut in half. Meanwhile, the White House announcing big changes to Social Security.
It's going to make field offices more crowded. It's going to make it more difficult to access the benefits that we have all earned.
All of this as the president doubles down on deportations and pushes forward with ceasefire talks between Russia and Ukraine. We'll bring you the latest. Plus, mixed messages from the Fed. Interest rates holding steady for now, despite concerns about inflation and the trade war. More on the decision, plus reaction on Wall Street. And open for work and in demand. LinkedIn is out with its first ever list of skills on the rise. We'll break down the ones that could give your resume a big boost. I am sure it will be a surprise to no one. Number one has to do with AI.
TV news anchoring. No.
Yeah, right. We wish.
Skill. All right.
The dying breed.
Good to have you with us. I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers. We're going to begin this morning with some wild weather sweeping across the country. In parts of the Midwest, blizzard conditions are over, but snow is still falling from Iowa to Michigan this morning.
Already powerful winds and possible tornadoes tore through the Midwest, leaving behind uprooted trees and buildings without roofs. And to the south in Arkansas, the fire danger remains a concern after wildfires broke out across the state Wednesday. The National Weather Service warns that very dry air in that part of the country will linger into the weekend. We're going to have meteorologist Angie Lassman standing by with the latest on all things weather. But first, let's go to NBC News correspondent Maggie Vespa, who's on the ground in Stager, Illinois.
Joe, Savannah, good morning. It's like a battle of the seasons out here. I'm not sure if you can see, we have snow coming down here on this first day of spring. And then behind me, just behind that snow in the background, we have the destruction from one of the many reported tornadoes and windstorms that basically roared through this area overnight. We're seeing kind of pockets of destruction like this really all across the Midwest, especially in Illinois and Indiana. 8 tornadoes reported overnight in Illinois alone. So we had that violent winds, those violent winds and tornadoes here. And then we also had snow and blizzard-like conditions really coming to fruition elsewhere. We had blizzard warnings popping up from Kansas, basically up through Minnesota. Some areas, especially in Iowa, seeing more than a foot of snow overnight. And then it's really kind of been this patchwork of severe weather across the country. Down south, and we saw this over the weekend, it's continued. We've had those same crazy winds kicking up dust storms in the southwest, kind of as far south as like New Mexico and Texas. But here's the thing. As this system moves across the country, we've seen reports of the dust from New Mexico and Texas being pulled as far east as like St. Louis. One meteorologist in Iowa reporting brown snow, saying it appeared the snow had mixed with the dust as it was falling. And then finally, not to leave the southeast out, Florida dealing with brush fires right now, closing some major roadways. We saw families fleeing the flames, having to drive as fast as they could to get through it. Thankfully, and our desk is checking again this morning, we haven't seen any reports of injuries thanks to these storms or these tornadoes here in the Midwest. But suffice it to say, again, on this first day of spring, tornado season appears to be off and running with that icy grip of winter, guys, really still holding strong. I'll send it back to you.
Maggie, stay safe. Thank you very much.
Let's get a closer look at what to expect from the severe storms with your Morning News Now weather.
Angie Lassman's with us now. Hey, Angie, good morning.
Hi, guys. Good morning. We've got some snow. We've got some rain that we're going to deal with today. Thankfully, a lot of that severe activity winding down yesterday. We'll see the potential for some fire weather as well, but we'll get to that in a moment. Let's start first with that same system that we've been tracking for the past couple of days. It's on the move. This morning, it's the snow across parts of the Great Lakes. And as we get into later today, it's the rain along the I-95 corridor specifically. It'll be heavy at that. That could slow you down for any of those evening plans that you may have. This is a pause at 8 p.m., so you can see that's kind of set up right along the coast. And we could see some lingering snow showers across parts of the Appalachians as well. The good news is this system's out of here by tomorrow for the most part. Most of the Northeast will be dry. We'll see this kind of little batch of some wet snow hanging out for parts of northern New England, but otherwise it's just going to be the cold winds across parts of the Northeast that'll get your attention if you live in that area. A lot of the wind alerts have expired. expired. A lot of the winter alerts have expired, but we're still going to look at maybe some 30, 40 mile per hour wind gusts across parts of the Midwest and maybe the Northeast and the Mid-Atlantic today. 30, 40 miles per hour, not quite as intense as what we saw yesterday, but still could impact some of those airports, and travel conditions might be delayed in a couple of spots, specifically Detroit, Chicago, Buffalo, Washington, D.C. Those are all locations that with the rain, the snow, and potential wind, I would watch for some delays. Philadelphia, Raleigh, also possible to see some delays there. Now, when it comes to the fire weather alerts, we've got kind of a couple of spots. We've got an area across parts of the plains and focused across the Rockies. We've got it along the Gulf Coast, and we've got Florida. You heard Maggie talking about those brush fires that we've seen for the eastern portions of the state of Florida. Today, 15 million people are waking up under these fire weather alerts. And again, this is extending from Daytona Beach through Fort Pierce, Melbourne, West Palm Beach, and Miami here, with the dry vegetation, the dry conditions, leaving them with a critical risk. That goes for parts of Texas and New Mexico, stretching into Oklahoma and parts of Colorado as well. We'll watch for that as we get into the next probably day or so to continue, likely into the weekend, with that dry air sticking around. Out west, different story. We've got our next Pacific storm that's going to basically slide into the coast, Washington, Oregon, seeing some of that heavy snow and the rain and the potential for strong winds. The snow setting up over the Cascades today, and then by tomorrow, some of that sets up over parts of the Rockies. You'll notice the rain sticks with our friends along the coast as well. This is something they'll deal with here for the next couple of days, and essentially maybe even into Sunday, we could pick up some additional rain. 3-4 inches close to the coast is where you'll see those higher amounts of rainfall. As far as the snowfall is concerned, about a foot in some spots, maybe 2 feet in some of those higher elevations across the Cascades and those northern Rockies. And this says spring, if anything does. It's like upper 70s in Norfolk today, mid 40s in Lexington, not that far away. So we've got some cool air in place from the Great Lakes, basically behind that storm system that we've been watching. We've seen our temperatures drop about 5 to 10 degrees below where they should be. So upper 50s for Atlanta today. We head to the upper 60s, though, for Philadelphia. Those temperatures are warmer than normal. And then we've got that clash of seasons continuing tomorrow.
When Buffalo's warmer than Atlanta,
that says
things are a little upside down.
Yeah.
Find the cold front. It's exactly the game to play.
It's been kind of nice here, though. I've been loving it. All right. Thanks, Andrew.
You got it.
In Washington, President Trump is set today to take the first step toward dismantling the Department of Education. It's all part of his efforts to downsize the federal government.
Yeah, the White House has confirmed that Mr. Trump will sign an executive order to shut down the department at an event later today. Now, closing it does require congressional approval, but the president's actions could make work for its employees nearly impossible.
NBC News White House correspondent Aaron Gilchrist joins us now. Aaron, good morning. So what is going to be the immediate impact of this directive on the Department of Education itself? And just what does this mean for education more broadly?
Yeah, Joe, I don't know that it's clear what the immediate substantive impact would be that students in classrooms might see as a result of this executive order that we expect the president to sign around 4 o'clock this afternoon. At the same time, as you noted, this is going to be the moment where President Trump directs his Secretary of Education to start dismantling, as you said, this particular agency. And I'll read to you some of what we expect the executive order to say, that the Education Secretary should take all necessary steps to facilitate the closure of the Department of Education while continuing to ensure the effective and uninterrupted delivery of services, programs, and benefits. We're told by a senior administration officials that this effort would not impact Title I, would not impact student loans, would not impact services and aid for students with disabilities. Those things will not be touched, according to this senior administration official. And you have to remember, Joe and Savannah, that when Linda McMahon became the education secretary, one of the first things she did was send to her staff a note that talked about the agency's final mission, one in which they would start to shut down. And then just a few days later, we learned that the education department cut its staff of about 4,100 people across the country almost in half to about 2,000 employees. And that also impacted several departments, several offices inside the Department of Education. And she's also already begun the restructuring process that we know was mandated by an executive order that went out to all the federal departments. And so this effort to start closing down that agency, or really minimizing the work that it does, really is actually already underway.
Aaron, I mentioned a moment ago that closing the department needs an act of Congress. What does support look like over there? Is there enough, and will it head there anytime soon?
Well, we haven't heard anything about the White House constructing any legislation that would go to the Hill that would start to close down this department legislatively. Of course, we know this is an agency that was stood up about 45 years ago by an act of Congress during the Reagan administration is when it started operating. And at this point, despite the bipartisan support that we saw when this agency was created, right now we know that there's been a lot of support in general for what President Trump has been trying to do among Republicans on Capitol Hill. Democrats have indicated they would push back on this hard. The president indicated that he thought he would have to work. He knew he would have to work with Congress. The education secretary said the same thing. The teachers union, the National Education Association, has said that shutting down this department would negatively impact students, sending class sizes soaring, making higher education more expensive, they say, and also would create some issues with civil rights protections that really are at the heart of what the Department of Education has done over the last almost 45 years that it's been in existence, Joe and Savannah.
Aaron, let's turn to the Russia-Ukraine war. We know President Trump spoke with Ukraine's President Zelensky yesterday to brief him on the conversation that Mr. Trump had with Russia's President Putin. What do we know came out of those talks?
Well, there was additional agreement about a ceasefire on energy infrastructure in Ukraine. The Ukrainian president agreed with President Trump about that particular issue, under which we know there was some agreement with President Putin as well. I do want you to hear how the White House press secretary described parts of that phone call that lasted about an hour between President Trump and President Zelensky. Listen to this.
President Zelensky asked for additional air defense systems to protect his civilians, particularly Patriot missile systems, and President Trump agreed to work with him to find what was available, particularly in Europe. President Trump also discussed Ukraine's electrical supply and nuclear power plants. He said that the United States could be very helpful in running those plants with its electricity and utility expertise. American ownership of those plants would be the best protection for that infrastructure.
And so our understanding, Joe and Savannah, is that the next step here is for delegations from these countries involved to meet in Saudi Arabia over this weekend to try to hammer out some of the final details of a ceasefire agreement and to start talking about a broader ceasefire that might start the process of bringing an end to the war in Ukraine, between Ukraine and Russia.
We also want to ask you about some new NBC News reporting here. 3 U.S. defense officials have told us that the Trump administration is considering plans to create a militarized buffer zone along the southern border. What do we know at this point?
Yeah, our team that covers the Pentagon has been working on this story and has been able to find out from those sources you mentioned that the administration is considering creating this buffer zone and staffing it with U.S. troops that would intercept migrants who come across the border. As we understand it, a plan has not been approved at this point. It's not clear how far along the planning process is for this possibility. But if it were to come to fruition, our understanding, Joe and Savannah, is that this zone would be along the New Mexico border. And it would be sort of a holding area for migrants that come into the country before they're handed over to ICE and CBP authorities to start the deportation process that this administration has been pushing so hard with, Joe and Savannah.
All right, Aaron Gilchrist in Washington. Aaron, thank you.
Well, the Trump administration is also planning to close hundreds of Social Security Administration field offices and cut thousands of jobs. This comes as some Social Security recipients may need to verify their identity in person soon. NBC News correspondent Liz Kreutz has more on the potential impact of these changes.
A major change coming to Social Security. In an effort to crack down on fraudulent claims, the Trump administration planning to impose stricter measures on how to verify a person's identity. Soon, people will no longer be able to prove their identity over the phone, meaning those who can't do so using the online service have to go in person. The change comes as the agency plans to close dozens of Social Security offices nationwide and lay off thousands of workers. The tightening measures coming from DOJ and Elon Musk, who is using claims of voter fraud and illegal immigration to make the pitch for cuts, allegations for which he hasn't offered evidence and experts say is inaccurate.
By using entitlements fraud, the Democrats have been able to attract and retain vast numbers of illegal immigrants.
And buy voters.
And buy voters, exactly.
While the Trump administration has repeatedly said it isn't cutting benefits, just potential fraud, advocates warn those with mobility issues or limited access to the internet will suffer.
How important is the phone service at the Social Security Administration?
Oh, it's extremely important. It's going to make field offices more crowded. It's going to make it more difficult to access the benefits that we have all earned.
Liz Kreutz, NBC News.
President Trump is clashing with a growing number of federal judges who have temporarily blocked some of his actions. One judge issued a new warning to the administration yesterday, saying there will be consequences if they don't answer his questions. NBC's Garrett Hake has the details.
President Trump intensifying his clash with the courts, calling out federal judges he argues are intentionally trying to derail his agenda, including a judge who temporarily blocked Trump's invocation of an 18th century law to deport nearly 300 undocumented migrants and alleged gang members to a prison in El Salvador.
He actually said we shouldn't be able to take criminals, killers, murderers, horrible, the worst people, gang members, gang leaders, that we shouldn't be allowed to take them out of our country. Well, that's a presidential job. That's not for a local judge to be making that determination.
That judge granting the administration one more day to respond to questions about those Saturday deportation flights and warning of, quote, consequences if he learns the government deliberately ignored his order to turn the planes around.
I never did defy a court order.
And you wouldn't in the future?
No, you can't do that.
We pressed the White House about those flights.
Will those flights to El Salvador continue while this case is being appealed?
We don't have any flights planned specifically, but we will continue with the mass deportations. This is an activist judge who is trying to usurp the president's authority.
Federal law enforcement says the deported migrants include members of two gangs the president has designated as terrorist organizations, Tren de Aragua and MS-13. In a court filing, a senior ICE agent says, quote, many of the TDA gang members had not committed crimes in the U.S., but that does not mean they pose a limited threat. It comes as family members of some of those sent to El Salvador argue their loved ones are not gang members. Miralise Cacique recognized her son in a video from the prison. She says he was undocumented, but not in a gang. He has no criminal record. They should send him back to Venezuela, she says. The White House refusing to reveal details about those deported on the flights, including names, saying they trust ICE and Border Patrol investigators.
We are not going to reveal operational details about a counterterrorism operation. They have the highest degree of professionalism, and they were 100% confident in the individuals that were sent home on these flights.
So far, NBC News has tracked 37 rulings from federal judges that have at least temporarily blocked actions taken by President Trump, with a federal judge blocking his executive order banning transgender people from military service. The Trump administration paused $175 million in federal funding to his alma mater, the University of Pennsylvania, for allowing a transgender athlete to compete on the women's swim team.
Our thanks to Garrett Hake for that report. A spokesperson for the University of Pennsylvania said it is aware of media reports about that suspension, but the university has not received any official notification or details.
Now, the Federal Reserve is weighing in on the economy for the first time since President Trump imposed those tariffs on some imports. Yesterday, the Fed announced it was holding interest rates steady at around 4.3%. Now, that means the rate you borrow at for mortgages, for your credit cards, auto loans, it's likely to stay about the same for now.
Stocks did go higher on the news that rates are remaining steady. The Dow Jones, S&P 500, and NASDAQ all closed up yesterday. But the Fed also sent out some mixed messages on where it sees the economy going this year. It's warning about increased inflation, the trade wars, and the recent mass firings at the federal government.
For more on this, let's bring in Caleb Silver. He is editor-in-chief at Investopedia. Of course, a friend of the show, Caleb. Always great to have you here. Good morning. Okay, so let's talk about the mixed messages that Joe just mentioned, because there was this concern expressed, which I think was expected, between inflation and tariffs, but then also, like, sort of this potential for cuts later this year. What do you make of those?
Well, that's both things playing at each other. The Fed chair saying that inflation is coming from an exogenous source. What's that source? It's tariffs, but we yet don't know the impact of those. April 2nd is when most of those go into effect. So the Fed has lowered its growth projections. It's raised its inflation outlook, and that looks like what we call stagflation, when you have rising prices but a slowing economy, which means the Fed may be forced to cut a couple of times this year. There was talk that maybe it might only be one. We know the president wants lower interest rates. They may be forced into cutting those rates to jumpstart the economy.
On Wall Street, the markets did close higher yesterday. It's been kind of quiet this week compared to a volatile past couple of weeks. What is it investors are seeing and hearing right now?
It's the notion that there'll be a couple of rate cuts. When rates go lower, that means higher profits for companies, and that's what investors are investing in. They want higher profits. That usually means higher stock prices, so they're excited about that. You see a sell-off back this morning, so it's been a lot of a push and pull. But since Election Day, the S&P 500 is now down 3.5%. The Dow's pretty flat. So we had that big run-up in the stock market after the election. Everybody think there'd be deregulation, open for business, but tariffs are now putting the shadow over the economy and probably going to slow it, and that's what the Fed is looking at. But they don't know if that's going to be a very temporary thing, what they call transitory, or if this is a long-term effect that's going to mean prices are going to be higher for Americans. We should probably expect that.
What is the take-home right now for any average person?
Yeah, rates are going to stay where they are for the near term, and we know prices are going to rise. So expect more inflation, not rampant inflation like we had in 2021, 2022, but higher prices and no rate cuts for the time being. Stick with what you see right now. This is the economy we're in.
All right, Caleb Silver, thanks as always.
This morning, American Joshua Reeby is back on U.S. soil. He is the last person believed to see missing student Sudiksha Kunanki alive in the Dominican Republic. NBC News is first to report on Reeby's return to the U.S. His attorneys allege he was detained for days in the Caribbean nation and his passport was confiscated while he was questioned over Kunanki's disappearance. He has not been charged and no suspects have been named. Kunanki was last seen in this surveillance footage at her hotel in Punta Cana. The University of Pittsburgh Jr. was on spring break when she disappeared. Much more to come here on Morning News Now. Later this hour, not your ordinary TikTok alert, the new partnership just announced by the platform that could help save lives.
Up first, though, after the break, a new phase of war in the Middle East. Israel sending ground troops into Gaza for the first time since ending a fragile ceasefire with Hamas. We'll be right back.
Sirens sounded throughout Israel this morning. That's because Houthi rebels in Yemen launched a missile toward Tel Aviv, which Israel's military says it intercepted. Hostilities with the Iran-backed militia are intensifying after President Trump launched strikes on Yemen this week for its attacks on shipping in the Red Sea.
This comes as the Israeli military is escalating operations in the Gaza Strip, announcing this morning that Palestinians will no longer be allowed to enter northern Gaza from the south. IDF forces launched a ground operation in the enclave following a day of airstrikes that left hundreds of Palestinians dead, according to local health officials. Now, Israel's defense minister said these strikes were only the first step in this new phase of the war.
NBC News international correspondent Matt Bradley joins us now from Tel Aviv with the latest. Matt, good morning. Let's start with this missile that Israel intercepted from Yemen earlier today. What more do we know about that?
Yeah, Joe, let's start with what we just heard in just the past 2 minutes, actually. That was a similar sort of pattern. We heard what sounded like the impact just behind me of maybe the Iron Dome. We don't know exactly what that was, but it did sound as though there are fresh missiles being fired. We're hearing from news reports that there were sirens being sounded across central Israel. And again, I'm talking about in just the past minute or two before we went live. So that is still ongoing. And I can't give you any information about where those missiles were fired. They could have been from the Gaza Strip. They could have been, as you mentioned, what happened overnight from the Houthis in Yemen. That woke up all of Tel Aviv, including myself. But now it sounds as though we're hearing fresh bombardments, and there are reports of sirens, but we didn't hear them here. Guys?
Matt, first of all, stay safe, and thanks for telling us more about that. But now let's switch over to these ground operations in Gaza by the IDF. What is Israel saying is the reason behind this particular offensive, and how's Hamas responding?
Well, this is part of that offensive that we saw starting very, very early on Tuesday morning at around 2 a.m. local time when the Israelis scrapped that treaty that had been inked with American help back in late January and started a sprawling set of bombardments all across the Gaza Strip that have killed more than 400 people. And it was just last night that we saw the Israelis. They announced that they were moving in with ground troops. Now, that is unclear whether or not that was just yesterday. They said that this has been going on for the past 24 hours. Now, the IDF said that they were taking up positions that had been familiar to them for the past year and a half, specifically that Netzarim corridor, which is an Israeli-built roadway that bisects the Gaza Strip and that the Israelis had been using in the past to prevent Gazans from moving from the southern part of the Gaza Strip to the northern part, from the northern part to the southern part, and now it looks as though they've assumed positions along there. If you remember, over the past 2 months, ever since that treaty was signed, the Israelis have been gradually withdrawing their forces to the periphery of the Gaza Strip. So what we saw last night and into today is just the full completion of the return of combat operations to the Gaza Strip and the end of that hard-won treaty.
Matt, in Israel, thousands of Israelis yesterday took to the streets of Jerusalem. They're calling for a renewed ceasefire in Gaza. They're protesting recent political decisions by Prime Minister Netanyahu. Just politically, where does Netanyahu stand right now?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, Joe. And one of the things that we're seeing here is kind of pages out of Trump's book. We saw Benjamin Netanyahu actually sending out a message on social media saying that he was going after the left-wing deep state and trying to fire the head of the Shin Bet, which is kind of Israel's answer to the FBI, with whom he's had a political conflict. The Shin Bet has been investigating Benjamin Netanyahu on multiple different cases, including sensitive issues related to October 7th. So it looks as though Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu are converging in their approaches to dealing with bureaucrats and law enforcement. Guys?
All right, Matt Bradley in Tel Aviv. Matt, thank you so much.
Let's get you some more international news now. There are protests in Turkey over the arrest of the mayor of Istanbul.
NBC's Claudio Labanga joins us from Rome with that and some other world headlines. Claudio, good morning.
Joseph, good morning. Well, that's right. Thousands of people took to the streets in Istanbul despite a ban on protests after the city's mayor was detained by the authorities. The mayor of Istanbul, Ekrem İmamoğlu, is considered one of President Erdogan's stronger political rivals and was arrested at his home days before he was due to be selected as a presidential candidate. Prosecutors accuse him of corruption and aiding a terrorist group. İmamoğlu called the accusations against him lies, conspiracies, and traps. And while the police was entering his home on Wednesday, he posted a video on social media saying that the will of the people cannot be silenced. Let's go now to Malaysia, where the country's cabinet has approved a new search for the wreckage of flight MH370, more than a decade after it vanished. In 2014, the plane was traveling from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing with 239 people on board. Less than an hour after it took off, it lost communication with air traffic control, and radar showed it deviated from its planned flight path until it disappeared. Despite extensive searches that went on for 3 years, no wreckage was ever found, making it one of the world's greatest aviation mysteries. With the new search, Malaysia hopes to finally find that wreckage and provide answers to the passengers' families. Let's end this tour of the world in Finland, named the happiest country in the world for the 8th year in a row. Or at least that's according to the World Happiness Report, a ranking published every year by the University of Oxford. As always, other Nordic European countries like Denmark, Iceland, and Sweden made it to the top of the list. What about the United States? Well, it ranked 24th, while Afghanistan is still bottom of the list. Now, Italy, I thought we were top 10, to be honest. What's not to like? Good food, good wine, good weather.
Agreed.
But no, we are apparently number 40 before Panama. Well, apparently we're not doing so well with corruption and traffic and so forth, but nobody's perfect.
You're going to have to start a happiness campaign, Claudio.
Yeah.
I think that's the key right there.
It is a scary place to drive. Maybe that is part of the issue. All right, thanks, Claudio. Yep. Coming up, plot twist. A Hollywood director under arrest accused of stealing millions of dollars from Netflix.
The allegations over a sci-fi series that never got made. You're watching Morning News Now.
We're back now with a new partnership between TikTok and the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Starting today, roughly 170 million Americans, those on TikTok, will now get local Amber Alerts on their For You feed.
The app kicked off the program, last year in Texas, where the alerts garnered more than 20 million views. TikTok also contributed 2.5 million visits to the national organization's website. It's all part of an effort to raise awareness of missing children.
Sarah Turney joins us now with more on this. She's a TikTok creator, a missing persons advocate, and the founder of Voices for Justice. Sarah, good morning. We're going to get to this announcement, these Amber Alerts, in just a moment. But in addition to everything I just mentioned, this is also deeply personal for you. I mean, I know that you use TikTok actually to help identify your sister's killer. First, just tell us what it was like working through something, discussing something so deeply personal on such a public platform, and in what ways it helped.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I mean, of course, this is deeply personal to me, and it was extremely difficult to get on TikTok and start making videos. But once I did, they started to go viral. And I was so lucky that so many people cared about my sister. I mean, I can't recommend it enough. TikTok changed my life and changed my sister's case forever.
If you can walk us through now how these Amber Alerts are going to work, what can people expect to see when they do get an alert on TikTok?
Yeah, they're going to be integrated into your normal feed. As you're swiping, you're going to see an Amber Alert that's local to your area.
Sarah, you mentioned this with what it did with your sister, just in terms of kind of a reach here. But tell us more about how this information, specifically going on a social media platform like this, getting into the feeds of 170 million Americans, how that can make a difference when it comes to missing children investigations.
Oh, I mean, my goodness, it can make all the difference. I think the best case scenario for most missing person cases is to get this information in front of as many people as possible. So with access to 170 million Americans, I mean, I think it's the difference between kids coming home and staying missing.
You know about that access firsthand. You have more than 1 million followers on TikTok. I know one of your posts about your sister's case got more than 22 million views on the app. Talk about just how popular, I mean, this kind of content, this fascination people have with true crime, with cases like your sister's, and how big that is on TikTok right now.
Oh, goodness. True crime is so big on TikTok. I think, it's big on every platform right now, but especially TikTok, and just the way that it's so easy to create these videos, upload them, and, hopefully make them go viral. It's absolutely dominating the app right now.
Sarah, how can people make sure that they're accessing accurate and reliable content on social media? I mean, when you think about something as critical as a missing persons case or any crime-related investigation, really where accurate information is so important.
I think the biggest tip is really just making sure that you're looking at where you're getting your information from. Like I said, anybody can upload to this app, so it's really important to dig a little bit deeper and make sure that what you're sharing is accurate, and make sure that you're getting that information from verified sources like TikTok or the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children.
Sarah, thank you very much for joining us on this important announcement, and also for sharing a little bit about your story personally, about your sister. We really appreciate your time this morning.
Of course. Thank you.
The California filmmaker has been arrested for allegedly defrauding Netflix out of $11 million for a sci-fi series that was never made. NBC's Yasmin Vasugian has the details.
It's like a scene out of a movie.
Was all this legal?
But instead, it's about a movie, or a movie maker, that is. Carl Eric Wrench, arrested Tuesday over charges including wire fraud and money laundering, alleging he defrauded Netflix out of $11 million. Acting U.S. Attorney Matthew Podolsky in a statement saying, quote, as alleged, Carl Eric Wrench orchestrated a scheme to steal millions by soliciting a large investment from a video streaming service, claiming that money would be used to finance a television show that he was creating. But that was fiction. While Netflix isn't named in the indictment, in 2018, the filmmaker sold a sci-fi series, White Horses, to the streamer for $44 million, as first reported by the New York Times. And a year later, he said he needed more money to complete the series. In March of 2020, Netflix paid $11 million more to finish the show, according to the indictment. Prosecutors say, quote, Wrench began transferring the funds he received through a number of different bank accounts before consolidating them in a personal brokerage account. And in 2 months, lost more than half of it. Our attempts to reach representation for Wrench were unsuccessful.
Likely the transfer to these different accounts contributed to the government's decision to charge money laundering.
And what else do prosecutors say he did with the money? According to the indictment, there was money spent to speculate on cryptocurrency, $1,787,000 in credit card bills, over $1 million on lawyer fees to sue Netflix, and even more for a divorce. He spent $395,000 to stay at the Four Seasons and other luxury rentals, almost $4 million on furniture and antiques, nearly $700,000 on 2 mattresses, and almost $300,000 on the sheets, plus the 5 Rolls Royces, the Ferrari, the watches, and the clothing, totaling over $3 million.
Expect the defense to try and characterize these expenditures as not personal, but instead income that he was entitled to and income that he went out and spent on. That still may be a difficult argument to make.
We reached out to Netflix, and a spokesperson has declined to comment. The arrest coming less than a year after Netflix was awarded $8.8 million in damages, a sum a judge ruled Wrench spent on non-production costs, in an arbitration initiated by the filmmaker, who alleged the streaming giant owed him $14 million.
Our thanks to Yasmin for that report. Following a hearing in Los Angeles, Rynch will appear next in a New York courtroom, although no date for that has yet been set yet. Coming up, straight from the source, controversy over a new trend that could impact your health. What you need to know about so-called raw water before you take a sip.
And Skill Search, a new list by LinkedIn, ranks some of the top trades companies are looking for when they hire. We will tell you what's on it next on Morning News Now. We are back with a new health trend sweeping the country from coast to coast. You might have heard of raw milk. What about raw water? That's untreated water that comes straight from the earth, usually from a natural spring. Now, health enthusiasts say it packs way more minerals than typically because it gets stripped out of filtered drinking water. But what are the issues here? NBC News correspondent Steve Patterson tried it out for himself.
On the side of a mountain in Northern California, right off a coastal highway, there's a copper pipe poking out of the red rocks, small enough that you'll miss it if you drive by too fast. Tapped into what some say is the best water you'll ever taste.
I just appreciate the clean, raw water that comes out of this spring.
It's called the Red Rock Spring, drawing its water from rain on a mountain high atop the Golden Gate National Recreation Area just outside San Francisco, overlooking the Pacific.
Good water, and it's on the way to work.
Okay.
Yeah, why pay for a plastic water bottle when I get, good water right here?
Devotees say raw water, which is found in the environment, springs, rainwater, and more, untouched by human processing, has beneficial minerals that are taken out of regular tap water. Another part of the process that this crowd doesn't like, adding fluoride. That mineral now targeted by Robert F. Kennedy Jr. with a plan he laid out to our Vaughn Hilliard in November.
I'm going to give them good information about the science, and I think that fluoride will disappear.
Kennedy hasn't spoken out on fluoride publicly since taking office, but Republican-led states are embracing the push, like Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who wants to let cities remove fluoride from water. Or Utah, where there's a bill on the governor's desk to block adding fluoride in any public water. As with many of Kennedy's beliefs, his claims that fluoride in water can be harmful have been discredited or unproven by medical science at the fluoride levels that the vast majority of us drink. Studies that show it could be detrimental to children's IQ are from countries where fluoride levels are much higher. And several health organizations, including the one he now runs, saying fluoride in water helps reduce cavities. Still, the lack of treatment is an appeal to at least some people here in California, too.
I come out here once a week usually.
Okay.
Just live up the road.
Yeah.
And the reason is that our water has fluoride in it. And so I don't want to drink fluoride.
There are even websites helping people find natural springs across the country, from California to Maine, where Brian Pullen actually holds the trademark for the term raw water. He owns Summit Spring and says this water has been quenching thirst for more than 100 years.
If you can find the source of a natural spring or some runoff from a natural spring, they're around the world. That water is incredible.
And you can see how it works. This water just pushing out from the sand in the spring. No pumps, just gravity. Unlike the pipe in California, Pullen says he spends about $10,000 a year on testing in 7 labs for 200 substances, twice EPA and FDA recommendations. But he also warns testing and making sure you're sure of your source is critical.
People that are trying to search out raw water is a great idea. The problem is some of these sources are roadside springs and such that nobody knows where the source of those are.
Back here at Red Rock Spring, we can't find any official entity that regularly tests this water, just some people on Reddit. Here we go. But I still had to try it.
Fill up, get a little bit there. Yep, that's a good amount. Okay, so there is a difference. And I'm not going to lie, the water does taste good. Would I live on it? I want to leave fate alone, but it's good water.
Looks fresh, crisp.
Exactly. We'll check back with Steve in a month and see how he's doing.
Steve, thank you for that report.
All right, this morning, another Cybertruck recall by Tesla over an exterior panel that could come loose while driving.
CNBC's Savannah now joins us with that and some other money news. Hey, Savannah.
Hey, Savannah. Hey, Joe. Good morning to you. Yeah, so Tesla is recalling more than 46,000 Cybertrucks here in the U.S. over an issue with the exterior trim, which can fall off while driving. Now, Tesla says its service group will replace the stainless steel assembly free of charge. The Cybertruck was recalled 7 times last year after it first went on sale at the end of 2023. The CEO of Lamborghini says the threat of U.S. tariffs on goods made in Europe could impact sales at the luxury automaker. Lamborghini, which is part of Volkswagen, says revenue rose 16% last year. Now, the company sold more than 10,000 vehicles, which is a record, with about 3,000 of those right here in the U.S., its biggest market. Now, asked about the ability to pass on the cost of tariffs to car buyers, the CEO says, well, there's a sweet point before you start to lose sales. And spring has sprung, and you can celebrate with several deals and freebies. Dairy Queen's annual free cone day is today, offering customers 1 small vanilla cone, and it is just 1 per customer, and they're not available for delivery. Rita's Italian Ice continues its annual tradition of giving away free 6-ounce ice in the flavor of your choice, and you can also enter for a chance to win free Italian Ice for a year on Rita's app. Now, Jamba Juice is marking the first day of spring with ice beverages for $1 from 2 to 7 p.m. local times. Get your deals.
All right.
Happy spring.
Does anyone get Dairy Queen delivered? That seems difficult.
No.
Right.
Like
Maybe a cake? I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe if it's quick, but yeah, not a dilly bar.
Yeah.
All right.
Savannah, thank you.
All right. If one of your goals for 2025 was to learn some new professional skills, well, a new list might help you decide what to focus on.
Yeah, for its first ever Skills on the Rise list, LinkedIn has ranked the competencies which it thinks are growing most based on factors like how many people are adding them to their profile and then which skills people getting hired have on their resumes. Well, topping this year's list, maybe no surprise, artificial intelligence literacy.
LinkedIn career expert Andrew McCaskill joins us now with more on this. Andrew, good to have you with us. So we'll get more into those skills in a moment. But first, I do want to talk about just this tough jobs market we're in. Last month, U.S.-based employers cut more than 172,000 jobs amid mass federal government job cuts. We're seeing a few other industries with a lot of layoffs lately. What should people who are worried about their job security be doing right now?
I think one of the number one things that they should do is to start to make sure that they are looking across the bow to see what skills are actually in demand, which ones they have, and where their gaps are. Because what we know for sure is that employers, about 50% of them are using skills data to actually source talent. And it's a competitive market. Half of professionals in 2025 are looking for work. That number jumps to 64% for African Americans and 62% for Latinos professionals in this country. And skills really do matter. Listen, I would say this even if I didn't work at LinkedIn, is that if you want to stay ahead of the curve, like using these skills, the skills list to help you understand what employers are prioritizing is good, not just for the job seeker, but also for that person who's actually trying to get ahead in the job that they already have today.
That's a really good point. So let's talk about number one, AI literacy, first on the list. Why is that, and what are we seeing when it comes to job trends related to that?
Listen, we expect that about 70% of the skills that are needed to do most jobs will change, and AI is really leading the charge for that. Professionals who can interpret and apply these tools, it's going to be the expectation, not the exception right now. I think that people have to really think about how they race with the machine and not rage against it. But because of those changes, you see some of the other skills that are on the list that people are really interested in having, like adaptability. Flexibility is going to be key. Process optimization. Every single organization wants people who are thinking about how can we work smarter and not harder? And that innovative thinking, as the world changes, regulatory change is happening, chaos in the marketplace is happening. We want people who are going to be thinking, how can we use this as an opportunity and not an obstacle?
I want to ask you about the second thing that was on that list, conflict mitigation. Doesn't sound like a new skill, so why is it more in demand, and where can you best use that skill?
Listen, you've got to think about what's happening in the marketplace right now. in that you've got 5 generations at work right now who all may think about professionalism differently. You've got all these external factors and bits of change and way people are thinking about things differently that will oftentimes seep into work. And what you want is people who can keep things cool when the pressure is on and help other people keep things cool when the pressure is on. Have a righteous professional debate about things and mitigate those conflicts that are happening at work, because you will have divergent opinions on so many things. And the people who are the peacemakers, the people who are the collaborators, the people who can create trust and drive innovation, they're going to win.
All right. Andrew McCaskill, some really useful advice here. Thanks so much for coming on and talking more about the list. Welcome back. The American Kennel Club just released its list of the most popular dog breeds of the last year. Take a look at who made the top 10. For the 3rd year in a row, not a huge surprise, the French Bulldog is the most popular breed in the U.S. Of course, Frenchies have celebrity fans, including Lady Gaga, Reese Witherspoon, and Dwayne Johnson. In 2nd and 3rd place, the Labrador Retriever and the Golden Retriever, always reliable. Also, let's give a little love to the Beagles, who actually bumped up a little in rank from number 8 last year to the number 7 spot now. Of course, every dog owner on our team.
Oh, I didn't know we were showing Lucy.
Think that your personal good boy or good girl deserves to be number 1, and that is all that matters.
Lucy the Mutt. It would just be Lucy. Nobody knows what she is. All right, Joe, thanks so much. Well, it's finally time to let the madness begin. The first round of college basketball's iconic tournament will officially begin later today. Now, Investopedia estimates that the NCAA gets nearly $1 billion in total revenue from the tournament every year. But have you ever wondered where the tradition of betting on brackets began? NBC News correspondent Sam Brock went on the hunt to find out.
Modern-day March Madness might be a national phenomenon now. But what if the birthplace of betting on brackets was actually an unassuming Irish pub on New York's Staten Island?
He started this in '76. He dedicated his life to Jody's.
As Terrence Haggerty tells it, his father founded Jody's Club Forest and immediately had a watershed idea, picking the final 4 teams and the champs with an entry fee of $10 per bracket.
I'm not going to tell you, it's official that we were the ones to start it. My father just started a pool, and it just grew, and the popularity of it was just astronomical.
What would Forest Avenue look like at the height of the tournament?
Total gridlock. Total gridlock. It was crazy. Like, you could not get up Forest Avenue.
That first year in 1977, Haggerty says it was 88 entrants with a pool of $880. Jimmy Steinhilber was part of that first pool, and for many years to come.
It was the thing to do on Staten Island. I mean, if you were a sports fan, you were in Jody's pool, and if you weren't, then you weren't a sports fan. That's pretty much what it was.
The winnings ultimately hitting hundreds of thousands of dollars, all in cash.
My living room and my dining room had a long table, and they were just older, my mother's friends, and they were the ones inputting the picks.
Wait, you had a whole workforce that was basically family and friends.
Family and friends.
In I'm picturing some dark room with a whole bunch of tables, and you've just got mounds and mounds of
mounds of papers. Yeah, it was really crazy.
The breaking point came in 2006 when $1.6 million in winnings prompted a visit from the IRS, which had a facility 2 blocks away.
One of the wildest parts about all of this, there was an IRS office in this building on the 2nd floor. But it was not the gridlock cars or the throngs of people on the street here that blew the cover.
The gentleman who won in '06 claimed that he won on his taxes. So that was it.
Jig was up at that point.
Jig was up.
The unforgettable ride, coinciding with a potentially equally historic tournament jolt hundreds of miles to the south.
From 1978 to basically the early 2000s, my dad ran a pool every year.
Where Damon Stinson says his dad, Bob, came up with the idea for creating individual brackets in the 70s, inspired by a recreational softball league.
He decided, you know what, why don't we do this for the NCAA basketball tournament?
That effort transforming into Bob's Jackpot, with thousands coming in using the bracket-style format we still fill out today.
We really love college basketball, and we love sports, and we're not afraid to make a wager or two along the way.
Tennessee feels frisky to me.
Wherever and however the roots sprouted.
All right, who do you have in the finals?
I have St. John's will play Duke.
The impact of what happened here will always be cherished like a buzzer beater for the ages. Sam Brock, NBC News.
Your bracket's done, right?
I know you want to ask me for tips. I'm not going to share anything.
You're a vault. Yeah. I do find that knowing more about basketball isn't always helpful.
Yeah, I think if I just did it random, it's...
Exactly.
You got
Upsets
a shot,
are upsets.
right?
Just don't pick 16s to go all the way. And you'll be in good
yeah.
shape. All right.
I'm totally going to do my bracket right after this.
That is going to do it for this hour of Morning News Now.
Well, don't go anywhere, though. The news continues right now.
Right now on Morning News Now, spring showers, a new season kicking off with much of the country recovering from severe weather. Overnight, fierce blizzards blasting the Midwest, while multiple tornadoes tore through Illinois. This morning, more strong winds and rain are heading to the northwest, threatening to snarl travel plans. We have team coverage with the latest starting in Chicago. Also this morning, border battle. The Trump administration threatening to send troops to the southern border to create a militarized buffer zone. This as his fight with a federal judge over immigration escalates. The White House slamming the judge who blocked the administration's recent deportation flights.
We don't have any flights planned specifically, but we will continue with the mass deportations. This is an activist judge who is trying to usurp the president's authority.
That judge giving the White House until today to answer questions about who was on those planes. All this as the president prepares to sign an executive order dismantling the Department of Education. We'll have all the details. Plus, holding steady. The Federal Reserve leaving interest rates untouched. We'll tell you what it means for the economy and when the next rate cuts could happen. And later this hour, breaking boundaries. Actress Jenna Bainbridge takes on the role of Nessa Rose in Wicked, the first wheelchair user to play the role in the show's 2+ decades on Broadway. Our conversation about the importance of representation on stage and beyond. Been in the role for a couple weeks now. It was very exciting. The first night she took the stage, huge applause the moment she went out.
And obviously, as Wicked's having a moment, so that's amazing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We have been talking about it a lot. All right, let's begin this morning and this hour with a rough start to spring as extreme weather continues to hammer parts of the country. This morning, millions are facing the aftermath of powerful storms and possible tornadoes that rip through the Midwest, leaving behind a path of destruction.
At the same time, a massive blizzard that battered parts of the region. It's now ended, but the powerful winds and heavy snow left thousands without power. Well, those same winds, they fueled a reported 50 wildfires in Arkansas, with crews remaining on high alert through this weekend. NBC News correspondent Maggie Vespa has the latest.
Joe, Savannah, good morning. On this first day of spring, it's like a battle of the seasons. We have snow, if you can see it, falling in the foreground. And then behind me, that's tornado and storm damage. The roof of this warehouse just ripped off, as you can see, and kind of draped over the side. Just one example of these violent winds that are sweeping across the country.
This morning, spring getting off to a destructive start in many parts of the country. Powerful winds and storms tore through several areas, with a string of possible violent tornadoes across the Midwest.
Look at the sheer destruction that was caused.
In Gary, Indiana, ripping entire roofs off of buildings.
This came out of the school.
Including a local school. Throughout the area, heavy winds uprooting trees and wreaking havoc on the roads in Illinois, where at least 8 tornadoes were reported. One driver even capturing this overturned semi on a road outside Chicago.
I see a funnel cloud when we're at Cedar and Laraway.
I think a couple semis flipped over.
Farther west, blizzard warnings stretching from Kansas to Minnesota, creating jaw-dropping whiteouts.
There he goes, jackknife.
This big rig losing control, crashing into the median. Those powerful winds creating a dust storm in Texas so thick it blocked the sun. Some of that dust blown all the way to St. Louis. Wind gusts expected to weaken in Arkansas today, a small victory for firefighters actively battling 38 wildfires in the region, and fire risks even reaching Florida. Massive brush fires closing major roadways. The Williams family barely escaping in time.
Within minutes, we're on top of it, and the flames were very, very close to us. We were all just telling my brother, floor it, floor it.
So glad they're okay. The good news, we haven't seen any reports of injuries from this latest round of storms at this point. But suffice it to say, clearly tornado season is off and running. Guys, I'll send it back to you.
All right, Maggie, thank you very much.
For more on the wet weather around the country, let's take a closer look with your Morning News Now weather.
Angie Lassman's here in studio with us. Hey, Angie, good morning.
Hi, guys. First day of spring, and we've got some snow, we've got some rain, we got some windy conditions in a couple of spots, so let's lay it all out for you. Here's the rain and snow. Not hard to tell where we're waking up to soggy conditions in some spots across parts of Ohio. You can see Indianapolis, you're waking up to some rain, some snow falling in Chicago. All of this part of that same storm system that's really caused a whole lot of trouble for folks across the country over the past couple of days. Today, it shifts farther east, and we've got this kind of line of rain that's going to stretch from the interior northeast all the way down to the mid-Atlantic, specifically I-95 corridor for that evening commute. It could be a little soggy. You might need a little extra time. This system will be out of here by tomorrow, so we're going to say goodbye to it, and we'll be left with some of these chilly winds and maybe a little bit of this kind of cold, wet snow across parts of northern New England. But beyond that, we'll still see some of those winds lasting. So even today, 20, 30, 40 mile per hour gusts are going to be possible. Not quite as impressive as what we've been seeing for the past couple of days, but enough for us to see possibly some delays from that. So places like Chicago could see that, Detroit, Buffalo, Washington, D.C. with the wind and the snow expected across parts of this region. I wouldn't be surprised if we see some extra delays in some of those locations. So heads up, Great Lakes, Mid-Atlantic is where we'll see kind of a bumpy ride. As far as the fire weather goes, we've been dealing with this for days and days. It's a little better today. We do still see dry conditions, dry levels of humidity. We're going to see the conditions across parts of the southern plains and the state of Florida, specifically the East Coast, last with that critical risk for today. Now, a different story out west, specifically the Pacific Northwest, where we've got a whole lot of rain expected across parts of Oregon and Washington, specifically through the day today. But the winds and the snow also on the table for parts of the Cascades. And as we get into tomorrow, parts of the northern Rockies will see some additional snowfall as well for our Friday as we wrap up our work week. The rain continues for our friends closer to the coast, and that's where we'll see kind of the more impressive rainfall amounts here as we get through the next couple of days. Now, spring break forecast, how about it? Let's talk about it, because San Diego specifically, we know there's always a whole lot of sunshine in San Diego. We're going to see nice conditions. Folks that are headed that way, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, upper 60s, low 70s. I don't think you can go wrong with a forecast like that. South Padre Island, similar story. We kind of start out into those low 70s by the time we get through Friday, and into Sunday, it's the mid 70s. A couple other popular spots, New Orleans, expecting temperatures to reach into those upper 70s by the time we get to Sunday. We'll see lots of sunshine here for this upcoming weekend. Great conditions, not expecting any delays in and out of these locations either as we lead up to travel for some spots. Again, plenty of sunshine for New Orleans. Panama City Beach, similar story too, a little on the chilly side on Friday. This typically happens in this location for spring break during this time of year, but it does rebound. We get back to the 70s by the time Sunday rolls around. And then Miami Beach. This is my favorite forecast, I think, of all of them. A lot of sunshine, low 70s on Friday, mid 70s, guys, on Saturday. Sunday, mostly sunny and 77 degrees. I think that's my favorite weather ever. That's
your
where
old
I want
stomping
waters.
grounds.
If I could, and my own stomping grounds. I could go for a lounge
Is
on
that
the beach
good
right
beach
now.
weather? 70s?
Joe,
Yes, okay.
77, mostly sunny.
Okay.
Oh,
Should
he
I go
doesn't
on?
know.
A light
No, I'm
breeze.
from Minnesota.
He doesn't know.
Light breeze, low humidity. I could keep going.
I would like it to be in the 80s, just so you know,
Right,
for
that's
future
what I was
reference.
thinking.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Fine, I'll
We'll
take the
take it.
80s.
Not in March. Then something's
Not in
wrong.
March.
All right. Thanks, Angie. All right. NBC News has learned that the Trump administration is considering creating a militarized buffer zone along part of America's southern border with Mexico. It comes as the clash between President Trump and the federal courts continues to escalate. NBC News senior White House correspondent Gabe Gutierrez joins us on this now. Hi, Gabe. Good morning.
Hi there, Savannah. Good morning. President Trump has tried to discredit judges before, but this time his administration is going further, arguing with the full weight of the Justice Department that a federal judge has no right to block the president's agenda. Today, the DOJ is facing a noon deadline to respond to some of the judge's questions, and it all comes as we're learning there could be another controversial immigration move in the works. This morning, President Trump's immigration crackdown could be moving into uncharted territory involving the U.S. military. 3 defense officials tell NBC News the administration is considering options to create a buffer zone along the New Mexico border that could include American troops temporarily holding migrants who cross into the U.S. The plan has not been approved, but comes as the White House continues to test the limits of executive power.
Americans can absolutely expect to see the continuation of the mass deportation campaign.
A clash with the federal court system has been intensifying. NBC News has tracked 37 rulings from federal judges that have at least temporarily blocked actions taken by President Trump. And the White House is pushing back.
This judge had no right to do that. They're meddling in foreign affairs. They're meddling in our government.
The Trump administration railing against Judge James Boasberg, who temporarily blocked the president from using an obscure 18th century law to deport alleged Venezuelan gang members to a prison in El Salvador. Boasberg was first appointed to D.C. Superior Court by President George W. Bush, then later elevated to the federal bench by President Barack Obama. In law school, he was roommates with conservative Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh. Throughout history, federal judges have been seen as apolitical when interpreting the law. The U.S. Constitution established 3 co-equal branches of government: the legislative, executive, and judicial. The system designed to prevent any one branch from becoming too powerful through a system of checks and balances. But the White House is arguing voters chose Trump, not the judges.
A single district court judge out of 700 cannot set policy for the entire nation, let alone on national security and public safety issues.
And Gabe, we understand the president is set to sign an executive order also shutting down the Department of Education today. Big news. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, Savannah, the White House confirms the president will sign that executive order today, directing the Secretary of Education to close the department and, quote, return education authority to the states. Now, the next steps are unclear since closing the department formally requires an act of Congress. But the White House has already been shrinking it, including cutting the workforce in half. Now, the country's largest teachers union is blasting the move, saying that it will hurt all students by sending class sizes soaring, making higher education more expensive, and gutting student civil rights protections. Savannah?
All right, Gabe, thank you very much.
Over the last few weeks, we've been tracking town hall meetings held by lawmakers all across the country. It's one way to gauge how Americans feel about the policies coming out of Washington.
Yeah, and as we've been seeing, both Democrats and Republicans, they're not shying away from venting their anger and frustration at the current political situation.
The host of MSNBC's Way Too Early, Ali Vitale, visited the town hall of New York Democratic Congressman Pat Ryan last night in Poughkeepsie and joins us here on set to talk more about that. Good to have you with us. First, let's talk about Representative Ryan, because he's a bit of an outlier, I think, when it comes to Democrats right now. Talk about why he wanted to go to his town hall.
This is a district that I've been tracking now for several election cycles because this Hudson Valley region of New York, and frankly all of upstate, is pretty purple. These are what we call frontline seats in election years. People who either could swing one way or swing another politically. Seats can be won and lost right here. That's certainly the story in New York. So for Pat Ryan, it's a district I've been tracking, and it's really an area where you're starting to see the impact of DOGE cuts keenly.
So tell us, what'd you see? What'd you hear? How are people feeling there?
We heard from a lot of people, from veterans who are seeing beds cut because VA programs have been cut by DOGE. People talking about the impact of that, walking into dark and empty clinics that they themselves once sought care at. I also talked with housing advocates and people who run nonprofits who say that they've had contracts with the Housing and Urban Development Agency that are on, then off, then on, then off. And in the interim, people are worried they're going to lose their homes because they rely so much on those subsidies. And all of that provides the backdrop for people being scared, frustrated, and then looking at Washington, especially after what Democrats did last week, and saying, what are you doing? We just want you to help. Listen to how some of the voters put it to me.
I don't think what he did was likable, clearly. Was it the best move? I understand it, but we're bringing pillows to a knife fight, and nothing is helping.
Are Democrats doing enough?
So some are. I mean, let's be honest.
Question, right? Because what could be done?
So you see people in the street, and people in the street are mad. People on the street are passionate, and we're not seeing that from leadership at points. So there are leaders out there that are fighting that fight, and there are leaders out there that are that same old model of let's comply and complain.
So Democrats nationally frustrated with Chuck Schumer. Democrats in New York here clearly voicing their frustration with Chuck Schumer. This is what Democrats are dealing with at town halls. And then Republicans have a whole other dynamic, people similarly frustrated and afraid. Republicans instead saying they back DOGE, they back Trump, they back Musk. But a different dynamic among Democrats as they try to just chart a path forward to figure out what can they do to assuage these scared voters?
I'm struck by just the images of that town hall there, because those aren't like young Democrats, liberals protesting. Those are senior citizens who go out and vote and get very politically active. So that alone tells some of the story here. I mean, Democrats are at a bit of a crossroads right now, right? I mean, what is it? Where does the party go from here when it's trying to fight some of these things?
I think that's what they're trying to figure out at town halls like this. Part of it is listening to where their base and their voters are, and that's why you actually have people who are so frustrated. Lawmakers, for example, one from Virginia telling me, I have a lot of federal workers in my district. They were all telling me to shut the government down. Other folks here in this town hall saying, I rely on government programs, but we have to shut the government down to make a point that we're not going to stand for what the administration is doing. So Democrats really caught between a rock and a hard place with their voters who are afraid of what's happening, afraid of the alternative, but not sure what the strategy is. And the one voter who's on the screen there said to the congressman who was on stage, as well as to the other folks who were there, it feels like there's a hole in this donut in terms of our party and having a sufficient plan and strategy to push back on. So a deep well of emotion on both sides of the aisle here.
All right. Ali Vitale, thanks so much. Good to see you here.
Great to have you in New York. Well, let's get you some economic news now. The Federal Reserve is keeping interest rates steady at about 4.3%. That news sent Wall Street rallying, with the Dow, NASDAQ, and S&P 500 all inching higher. But Fed Chair Jerome Powell, he warned that the president's tariffs could slow economic progress. Let's bring in NBC News senior business correspondent Christine Romans to explain what this means for you. Hey, Christine, great to have you with us.
Good morning.
It feels like the Fed potentially mixed messages that I just mentioned there, holding the rates, but then also being concerned about inflation and tariffs. What's behind this decision, and did the Fed indicate if they are considering a drop in rates later this year?
I think the big news from the Federal Reserve is that the entire chessboard has changed since December. The Fed is now seeing slower growth, higher inflation, a higher unemployment rate, and that's because there's a big new set of policies on the table, including these tariffs. And the Fed, again and again, the Fed chief yesterday said there's not clarity. There's a remarkable level of uncertainty. So I think that's the big takeaway for me from the Fed news yesterday.
So, Christine, investors seem to like the news. What do they see in this decision that's giving them some confidence, at least for now?
Well, two things. You had a very calm and patient Jerome Powell, very clearly laying out what is a dramatically changed outlook for the U.S. economy. And he essentially said it's coming from a good base point, right? That despite all that anxiety of the past couple of years over grocery prices, the underlying U.S. economy begins this journey in the second Trump administration from a good, solid place. So there's uncertainty ahead, but the underlying fundamentals of the economy are strong, and there'll be a couple of interest rate cuts still penciled in later this year. At least that's what they have on paper.
And Christine, that's what President Trump has said that he would like to see. Has the White House reacted publicly to yesterday's decision?
Yeah, you saw the president on Truth Social post the Fed would be much better off cutting rates as U.S. tariffs start to transition, ease their way into the economy, do the right thing. April 2nd is Liberation Day in America. What he's referring to there, the president, is reciprocal tariffs, potentially thousands and thousands of tariff lines that will go into effect or change higher tariffs on April 2nd on trillions of dollars of goods. I mean, logistically, I'm not sure how in the world they're going to pull all this off, but the president wants these tariffs on April 2nd. Unclear how that's going to filter through the economy for now. That's one of the reasons why the Fed is on the sidelines.
Christine, we always like to get as much advice out of you as we can and tap into that expertise. So based on all this, I mean, what areas should we look at when it comes to our finances?
I know a lot of people are really worried looking at the stock market and all of these headlines. Look, I say check your emergency savings. Make sure you got some money, 3 to 6 month savings, and make sure it's in a high yielding bank account so that you can get some pennies on your dollars. Pay down your debt. High interest debt is still a real killer here. And by the way, when you're paying down high interest credit card debt, you're raising your credit score, which actually helps you get a better deal when you're borrowing money. Check that 401k. Make sure you're comfortable with where you're sitting right now. For younger people, look, you can ride these ups and downs. It's actually an opportunity. For people who are close to retirement, you really want to be careful here about having too much exposure in the stock market if you need to start, taking that money out next year, for example.
right, great advice as always. Christine, thank you.
Nice to see you.
Much more to come here on Morning News Now. Later this hour, honoring U.S. service members. The first ever National Medal of Honor Museum opening in Arlington, Texas. We're going to give you an exclusive look inside and get reaction from one veteran who's been recognized for showing extraordinary valor in service to our country.
First, though, deadly Israeli airstrikes hit multiple homes in the Gaza Strip overnight, with doctors reporting dozens of casualties. We'll have the details when we come back.
We are back with Israel's escalating military operations in the Gaza Strip this morning. Local hospitals reported dozens of casualties from pre-dawn airstrikes in the enclave. That's according to the Associated Press. Before the strikes, Israel's defense minister suggested civilians in Gaza would pay the full price if the hostages who remain held by Hamas are not returned.
Israel's offensive, it signals a new phase of its war with Hamas in Gaza. The 2-month pause in fighting came to an end on Tuesday after Israel launched a deadly wave of airstrikes on Gaza.
And as the ceasefire in Gaza unravels, a deal for a limited ceasefire is taking shape in another conflict. Ukrainian President Zelensky agreed to halt strikes on energy infrastructure in Russia following a call with President Trump on Tuesday. NBC's chief foreign correspondent Richard Engel has details on their discussion.
Ukraine had a lot riding on this conversation between President Trump and President Zelensky, and it appears to have gone well. Now there seems to be progress toward reaching a limited ceasefire that could protect vital infrastructure, both here in Ukraine and in Russia. This time, the conversation between President Trump and Zelensky went much better. Both sides calling it substantive.
Mr. President, with respect.
Last time Trump and Zelensky met in the Oval, Zelensky was bullied, talked over, and accused of being an obstacle to peace.
You're gambling with World War III.
Now diplomacy appears to be making some unsteady progress. In a trust-building exercise, Russia and Ukraine exchanging prisoners of war. But so far, nothing has changed on the battlefield. With new Russian attacks overnight in central Ukraine, after a call this week with President Trump, Russia's President Putin agreed to stop attacks on Ukraine's power grid, according to the White House. Ukraine says Putin never did, but the terms were unclear. The Kremlin never committed in public to halting attacks on Ukraine's broader infrastructure, which White House envoy Steve Witkoff told NBC News was part of the understanding between Trump and Putin. President Zelensky, who has already committed to a total ceasefire, said he would accept starting with an energy grid-only ceasefire once the specifics are written down. Much of Ukraine's electricity and heat come from coal. We went deep into a mine in eastern Ukraine this morning. Nearly 300 yards below the surface are miles of shafts. Cable cars shuttle workers to the coal faces. Before the war, only men worked down here. But with hundreds of men out fighting from this mine alone, women have filled the void. Nadia Moskalenko is a 48-year-old grandmother now operating the cable cars. What would a ceasefire on infrastructure mean for you? For me personally, I would love this to end. 2 of my sons are fighting, protecting Ukraine, she says. And about the infrastructure, of course, we are all waiting for an end. We want our men to come back, to go back to work. They are Ukraine's Rosie the Riveters, keeping this country running for the last 3 years. And now hoping they'll get a rest. To give you a scale of Ukraine's commitment, before the war, around 3,000 men worked at this mine. Now, around 700 have deployed to the front lines.
Right, Richard, thank you. Coming up, IVF nightmare.
Yeah, NBC News investigates reports of serious mistakes at fertility clinics across the country. We'll hear from one couple who says they lost all of their embryos. That's when we come back.
We're back with an NBC News investigation into fertility clinics across the U.S. Tens of thousands of couples use in vitro fertilization each year to try and have children, but sometimes there are errors in the costly process.
It is rare, but there have been reports of embryos being mistakenly thrown away or storage tanks for them malfunctioning. NBC News correspondent Ellison Barber spoke with one couple who says they lost all of their embryos.
When Marissa Calhoun and Stephen Castaneda started talking about having children, they knew it wouldn't be an easy road. Marissa has stage 4 endometriosis.
And I've had
about 4 surgeries. And as a result of that, have spent a lot of time being told by doctors that I may never get the chance to become a mom.
Marissa knew she'd likely have to turn to IVF to conceive, so in 2023, the couple successfully created embryos. But then Marissa's doctor called.
He basically said the words that immediately let me know something was wrong, which is, I've never had to make a call like the call I'm making right now.
Marissa says the doctor told her that because of a labeling error, all 16 of her embryos had been discarded.
We got home and I just cried.
So in a week, you went from, we're having discussions about how many children do we want to have, to every single embryo is just in the trash.
Yeah.
Nightmare scenarios like that one are thought to be rare. But an NBC News analysis found that in the last 5 years, more than 300 lawsuits have been filed over similar claims, where fertility clinics or related companies allegedly lost, destroyed, or even swapped patients' embryos, eggs, or sperm. The vast majority involved some form of product failure, like when a storage tank that keeps eggs and embryos frozen malfunctions. But over a quarter of the lawsuits stemmed from alleged human error, including Marissa's.
How do you just throw away the chance for human life? Just toss it like it's the trash.
The federal government only tracks clinics' pregnancy success rates, not their mishaps.
IVF itself is the medicine of miracles. The problem is we just don't know how often things go well compared with how frequently mistakes happen.
The American Society for Reproductive Medicine, a professional association that recommends best practices for the fertility industry, says IVF is regulated essentially the same way as all medicine in the U.S., and that lawsuits are an important component.
I'm speaking out today.
Marissa and Stephen are now suing their clinic for negligence.
And maybe if enough of us speak out, there will be more protocol put into place. That's my only hope.
The clinic declined to comment on an active case but denied the allegations in a court filing. As for the couple, they're starting over from scratch at a different clinic. Ellison Barber, NBC News, Los Angeles.
Coming up, coverage denied.
It can be financially devastating when insurance companies reject claims for life-saving medical treatments. Up next, we'll look at why this happens in the first place and have some tips on how to fight back. We're back with a look at the potentially disastrous impact of having a health insurance claim denied.
Every year, millions of claims are rejected, and they're often for life-saving treatments. NBC News Now anchor Vicki Wynn joins us with more on what you need to know. Vicki, good morning.
Hey, good morning, guys. It's very frustrating to have a health claim denied. It can also be financially devastating for families. We teamed up with our local NBC affiliates to look at some surprising examples of when this happens, and we're going to tell you the best ways you can fight back.
When every second counts in a health scare, insurance is the last thing on your mind. But sometimes the aftermath is even scarier. An estimated 450 million health insurance claims are denied every year. That's an estimated 1 out of every 10 claims filed. The majority for higher cost services and treatments. The average denial for claims of $14,000 or more.
I just think it's going to financially devastate me.
Last fall, Amanda Boley took her dog for a walk, then suddenly collapsed in cardiac arrest.
I need an ambulance immediately.
As our NBC affiliate in Indianapolis reported, when paramedics arrived, Amanda wasn't breathing.
Stay with me.
To save her life, doctors had her med-flighted to the nearest major hospital, where a device was implanted to reset her heart.
Had they not flown you by helicopter,
I'd be dead.
The bill for that emergency air ambulance, $65,000. But Amanda's insurer, Anthem Blue Cross Blue Shield, wouldn't pay, writing this service requires pre-approval.
I was unconscious. I don't know how I'm supposed to get pre-approval.
So Amanda appealed, not once, but twice. Still, Anthem denied the claim, saying air ambulance services are subject to medical necessity reviews by us and will only be covered when approved in advance, before services are performed.
It's mind-boggling and it's infuriating that this can occur.
The Guyette family spoke to our NBC affiliate in Portland, Oregon. Their little girl, Gracelyn, needed emergency surgery after a fall, so doctors had her airlifted to a hospital with a pediatric surgeon. But later, that same insurer, Anthem, denied the nearly $60,000 transport bill, saying the air ambulance was not medically necessary.
It would feel odd as a parent when all these doctors are telling you she's got to go by air ambulance now to be like, no, wait.
Last year, the National Association of EMS Physicians sent this letter to federal health officials saying they've seen a spike in denials of claims. One possible reason for the trend, some experts believe insurance companies are using AI to make claims decisions instead of real people.
Unfortunately, we know that AI has mistakes. And sometimes insurance companies are denying claims inappropriately. They should be covering them.
The trade group for health insurers told us while AI is used to process some claim appeals, potential denials are always subject to human review. In a statement to NBC News, Anthem said AI is not used to deny air ambulance services. When our NBC affiliates contacted Anthem about these two cases, the company changed course and agreed to pay the claims. Telling them in Amanda's case, it made a mistake in how her claim was initially processed. In Gracelyn's case, Anthem said it only received the necessary medical information to justify air transport in the appeal process.
The appeal that we sent that they just approved was identical to what was sent before. I think certainly the pressure of having media on them is really probably what made this get approved.
Experts say to improve your chances of claim approval, review your policy to know what's covered. Make sure your medical providers send the insurer all necessary paperwork and justifications. And if your claim is denied, file an appeal.
The truth is, more than 50% of the time, people win when they file an appeal.
And you know, less than 1% of people actually do file those appeals. That's a pretty good return rate of 50% are approved. So file an appeal, file a second one if you don't get the answer that you want. Now, in response to Amanda's case, Anthem told our Indianapolis affiliate it's revisiting its training procedures and documents to prevent mistakes like this. The company adding that emergency treatment never requires prior authorization. By the way, we should say the health insurance trade group, they talked to us about the statistics that 1 in 10 claims is denied. They said that that was flawed, but then they didn't actually follow up with any new numbers or their own numbers. And so it is a frustrating situation for so many people. And the key here is to remember you should always appeal at least 2 times. And then, look, these folks contacted their local NBC affiliates and they got the claims paid for.
Right.
Good for them and good for the affiliates.
Wow. Just, you have to be your own advocate, but it's hard. You got stuff going on in your life.
I know.
Oh my gosh, and if you ever do call insurance, like the length of time that you're on the phone and how difficult it could be, yeah, absolutely. But really important advice there. Thank you, Vicki.
Bet.
All right, now to a new lawsuit that Amazon filed against the government safety agency after it was found responsible for recalling products from third-party sellers.
CNBC's Silvana Henao joins us with that and other Money News. Hey, Silvana, good morning.
Savannah, Joe, good morning to you. So Amazon is suing the Consumer Product Safety Commission for finding the company liable for recalls of thousands of hazardous items sold on its site. Now, in January, the agency ordered Amazon to take several actions, including notifying customers of recalls and issuing refunds to those who can prove they properly disposed of those products. Amazon has long disputed it's only a distributor of faulty items sold by third-party merchants and shipped it through its fulfillment service. Google Wallet is rolling out an upgrade over the next few weeks that will let kids download the app and use Tap to Pay with their parents' permission. Now, the feature will also allow kids to store passes such as event tickets, library, and gift cards on the app, and parents will be able to control whether their children have access to Google Wallet and Tap to Pay through the Family Link app and will get an email every time they make a purchase. And the ideal time to sell your home is approaching. A report by Realtor.com shows people who list their property the week of April 13th could sell for roughly $27,000 more on average than other times this year. Now, this site, it tracks seasonal trends and housing metrics, but didn't factor in mortgage rates. Now, Zillow says sellers generally get better returns if they list between mid-March and the end of July, but the peak time to sell, it really depends on market conditions in your specific area, guys.
All right, but mark your calendar if you're looking. All
Yeah,
right.
mark your
Thanks,
calendar.
Savannah. Appreciate it. Just a few days, the first ever National Medal of Honor Museum is going to open in Arlington, Texas.
Yeah, this morning we have an exclusive first look at this tribute to Americans who showed extraordinary courage and sacrifice in their service to our country. NBC News Chief White House Correspondent Peter Alexander has more.
The Medal of Honor to First Sergeant David H. McNerney.
The Congressional Medal of Honor.
We gather to present the Medal of Honor to one of these soldiers.
It's America's highest military honor, never sought after but always earned. The National Medal of Honor Museum, opening up next week in Arlington, Texas, serves as a tribute to the values America holds dear.
We're on a mission to inspire America. We want people to be inspired by these stories of courage and sacrifice and transfer those into their everyday lives.
After a deadly ambush in Afghanistan in 2009, Army Colonel Will Swenson repeatedly returned into harm's way to rescue members of his unit and recover the fallen.
You went in not once, but multiple times. Why?
That's simply what we do. We don't leave people behind.
That's you the day you received the Medal of Honor from President Obama. What's going on behind your eyes, in your head in that moment?
What you're not seeing in this picture is the families of Kennefic, Layton, Johnson, and Westbrook looking back up beyond that stage. But these are families who experienced loss, fathers, sons, husbands, gone.
If you look here, this is me growing up.
In 2012, Army Captain Flo Groberg also ran toward danger, tackling a suicide bomber in Afghanistan who was approaching his unit.
For me, it's humbling.
For him, the medal is both a point of pride and responsibility.
Call me a courier to an extent. This represents our nation. This represents the men and women who've put on uniform, raised their right hand, took an oath, and served at the capacity of this country required. But it also represents their families.
The museum's design itself is powerful, a massive suspended weight supported by 5 columns representing the military branches, a symbol of the burden these heroes shouldered. Inside, artifacts from the battlefield, like this Vietnam-era Huey helicopter, and personal effects of those that wore the uniform and went beyond the call of duty.
What strikes me is that we have a tendency to glamorize the Medal of Honor recipients and this is not superhero stuff. This is stuff done by regular folks.
We're not superheroes. We are everyday, ordinary Americans who served in our country's military to do wonderful things on behalf of our country.
Helping champion the museum, Charlotte Jones, chair of the foundation and executive vice president of the Dallas Cowboys.
When visitors walk into this museum, what do you hope they think? What do they say?
Today, you look around and what we need most in our country is to really understand what our country's about, the opportunity that exists here. You know, people are so often look at the things that separate us and divide us. This is something that brings us together.
And unlike most museums, this site is not just about preserving the past. It's about inspiring the future.
This line is not over. This is not a mausoleum. This is a living story here.
Living stories that remind us sometimes our darkest days reveal the brightest lights of the American spirit.
Our thanks to Peter for that first look. The museum opens to the public on Tuesday, which is National Medal of Honor Day.
You know, we get to continue this conversation now with NBC News military analyst, but also recipient of the Medal of Honor, Colonel Jack Jacobs. Colonel, good morning. I would argue you most certainly are a superhero. We're so happy to have you with us today. Tell us, when people walk through those museum doors, what do you hope that they take away from it? What type of experience do you hope that they have?
Well, I think the overriding consideration is are not necessarily just the stories or even the people involved, but what we all represent. And we heard it earlier, the valor of those who didn't come home. Think about all those people who performed valiantly and nobody saw it, or people did see it and the witnesses were all killed in action. And you realize that we recipients all say the same thing, that we wear the medal for all those who can't. And it represents, and what we want people to take away from is the notion of the values that drive ordinary people to do extraordinary things for their fellows. That's the thing we want them to take away.
Let's talk about your own story. You've opened up about your experience being wounded during an ambush in the Vietnam War. You then went out and brought back injured soldiers who were still out in the open. Yet you also say receiving this medal humbles you. Talk about why that is.
Well, among other things, you're among other people whose names were at the time household names: Audie Murphy and Jimmy Doolittle, Commando Kelly, Joe Foss, and so on. And to be among them, to be considered among them, is something of a heavy burden. I'll tell you a very quick anecdote. Shortly after I was decorated in 1969, Jimmy Doolittle, who conducted the raid on Tokyo in early 1942 to convince the Japanese we were actually coming back, we were going to fight, came up to me, put his arm around my shoulder and said, "Young man," he said, "you're no longer Jack Jacobs. You're Jack Jacobs Medal of Honor recipient, and you better comport yourself accordingly." And that's why all of us say the same thing. It's harder to wear the medal than it is to earn it in the first place.
Wow, wow. Fewer than 4,000 people, in fact, have received the Medal of Honor, and that's out of more than 40 million Americans who have served in the Army since the Civil War. Talk about the importance of keeping these stories alive, the specific instances that led to these medals.
Well, it's easy to forget the valor of all those who serve. You know, we've had tens of millions, I think something close to 40 million people in uniform since the start of the country. And we frequently forget that their exertions are what give us the opportunity to enjoy freedom today. And it's particularly worth remembering in an environment in which we don't have universal service, in which we've decided to outsource the defense of the country to a very small number of young men and women who are willing to do it. I think a gap has opened up between those who are being served and those who are serving. We can't forget those who even now are out there defending our interests and our freedom.
Colonel Jacobs, thank you so much for joining us. We are lucky to get to talk to you, to get to learn from you, and what a great conversation. Thank you.
My great pleasure.
We are back with an epic celebration of country music, 100 years in the making. The big Opry 100 was held last night, of course, at the iconic Grand Ole Opry. NBC broadcast a 3-hour live special with Blake Shelton as the host, and unforgettable performances from titans like Luke Combs and Keith Urban. Post Malone, who's a newcomer on the country scene, also joined Ashley McBryde for a tribute performance to Johnny Cash and June Carter Cash. And the night wrapped with a special moment honoring one of Joe's favorites, Dolly Parton. Reba McEntire and Carrie Underwood were joined by a choir for a rendition of I Will Always Love You. It was a packed night celebrating this iconic country music institution. But get this, the party is not over yet. The Grand Ole Opry will also be staging their first ever international performance with a concert at London's Royal Albert Hall this fall. Pretty cool.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.